We are back, and we are joined now by Susan Rinkunas, reporter covering abortion and politics. She's a contributing writer at Jezebel. Susan, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So you're in Chicago right now, covering the DNC, including a mobile health clinic that went there to give free appointments, a Planned Parenthood mobile clinic. But we can get to that in just a bit because we have some breaking news. The Arkansas Supreme Court has now denied a bid to get abortion on the ballot. We now, I think, have 8 or 9 states, Susan, that where it is on the ballot, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, and Arkansas, it was hopeful that would happen, but essentially it seems like they're rejecting the petition based on some paperwork claim. Give us an update on what's happening in Arkansas, if you don't mind.
Right. Well, the first thing I'll say about the campaign in Arkansas is that it is mostly local activists working on this. They haven't gotten support from the large organizations that are supporting other ballot measures, including Planned Parenthood and the ACLU. And part of that is because of the language of the ballot measure was planned to restore access through 18 or 20 weeks of pregnancy, even shorter than the viability standard that's in other ballot measures. So they didn't get some of the institutional support, but basically the organization behind the ballot measure employed some paid canvassers in addition to volunteer canvassers to get signatures in order to qualify the measure for the ballot. And the state is saying that they didn't file the correct paperwork for the paid canvasser specifically, and so that signatures from that they collected don't count toward the total. And the group has been appealing this, and it just went to the state Supreme Court, and they denied the group's bid to get on the ballot. But I will say it was going to be difficult for them to get on the ballot, even with those signatures. It seems like Arkansas was going to do literally anything it could to block this from going to voters.
Right. I mean, what is the reasoning behind claiming that just because they have paid organizers doing this kind of work, are they basically saying that it's corruption in some way? I mean, a lot of activists get a salary, by the way.
Right. It's not objection to their being paid canvassers. It's alleged problems with the paperwork for those people. Were they notified in time that they were going to be paid canvassers? Did they drop off the forms and have them notarized? Whatever. It's about truly a paperwork dispute.
It's about finding whatever they could to keep it off the ballot, basically.
Correct.
So that's really discouraging, especially because, of course, Arkansas is a deep red state, and the citizenry could have used those protections. But we do have some better news on this front. Earlier this week, it was determined that Montana would have abortion on the ballot. From an electoral politics standpoint, John Tester is running for re-election in Montana, and he could be the 50th vote for the Democrats if Harris were to win. This could be the determining factor for the Senate majority. So that's, and if we wanted to codify Roe into law, that would be key. So there are a lot of implications for Montana, even though it's such a small state. Susan, if you could just walk us through how the organizers, or why the organizers wanted to target Montana, how that process went, and how they were able to get it over the finish line with these signatures, despite Montana also, of course, being a red state.
Right. Well, the thing I'll say is that any organization that's moving forward with a ballot measure will first tell you their goal is to restore abortion access in that state or protect abortion access in that state. Montana does not have a ban in effect right now. And so this is more about protecting for the future of a potential Trump administration, or if the state Supreme Court were to change its mind and let some restrictions take effect. But then also, yes, you cannot deny the electoral politics here. John Tester is in a really competitive Senate race and could, in fact, be the 50th vote in order to pass lots of legislation, including a bill to restore federal protections. Activists there certainly still also faced challenges, but they had the institutional support to help them get it across the finish line. But I will say it's interesting because just the very fact that voters could vote separately on whether they support abortion access means that there could be ticket splitting, literally in any state where there's a ballot measure. So there's going to need to be turnout efforts to try to make sure that people are also voting for John Tester and also voting for Kamala Harris in order to truly protect abortion access. Because again, you could see someone showing up to the polls and saying, I want to protect abortion, I'm just voting on this ballot measure, and they don't fill out the top of the ticket. And that could lead to some problems, not just, people could even vote for Tester and not for Harris. And if Trump wins, he could actually enact abortion restrictions without Congress by enforcing something called the Comstock Act, which actually Keelan Thompson mentioned last night from his convention speech.
Can you explain the Comstock Act for some of our listeners and viewers? We've mentioned it before on the show, but it's this archaic law that could really crack down on abortion access throughout the country.
I would be so happy to. I've been writing about the Comstock Act for over a year now. It's a law from 1873 that was never wiped off the books. That's first of all. And it was passed by an anti-obscenity crusader who was really named Anthony Comstock, and he was really opposed to things like birth control and pornography and also abortion. It's not, the bill isn't just about abortion, but there are a group of right-wing lawyers and organizations, including Alliance Defending Freedom, which your listeners may be familiar with, and the Heritage Foundation, who believe that the Comstock Act could be enforced today to ban the mailing of abortion pills, because the text of the original law says that you cannot distribute these obscene things in the mail, and that includes drugs or devices to induce abortion. Lawyers have said that precedent hasn't been enforced in almost 100 years, back to like a 1936 Supreme Court case, let alone later ones that upheld abortion access. But it doesn't matter to the activists on the right. They see a tool they can use, and so they're going to grab it.
And this is a good way to transition to Arizona, because the initial abortion ban that took effect before a few Republicans in the state government got a little spooked that they would come off as extremists, which they are, they decided to enforce a separate 6-week ban on abortion. But prior to that, in Arizona, the abortion ban there they were enforcing a law that also, I think, was passed in the 1860s, of course, before women, in both the Comstock Act's instance and in this law's instance, before the women had the franchise. So like women, of course, couldn't participate in these votes, and they're choosing to enforce those laws in the present day. Arizona now has abortion on the ballot. This is a key swing state, obviously, so this could drive turnout for the Democrats, but is also integral to protecting abortion access for the people of Arizona. There's been, my understanding, Susan, the right-wing state Supreme Court in Arizona has muddied the language quite a bit on this ballot initiative to make it more favorable to anti-choice, anti-abortion activists. What's going on in Arizona as it relates to that ballot initiative?
You're absolutely right. The opposition in that state is doing everything it can to try to make voters vote against it. And one of the things they've been successful in doing so far is getting language in a pamphlet that gets sent to every Arizona voter to say that the ballot measure would, I don't know, I forget. Basically, instead of saying that abortion involves a fetus, the pamphlet says abortion involves an unborn human. And that's in the pamphlet that's going to get sent to voters. As far as I understand, there is still an active fight over what language is going to appear on the ballot itself when people show up to vote. It's possible that same unborn human language could show up on the ballot. And they have to do these. Let me just add, they have to do these things because they know they've been losing. Right. Truly, in 7 statewide votes since the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, people have chosen the pro-choice position, whether that was rejecting an anti-abortion proposition or supporting a pro-choice, pro-abortion proposition. So they just have to muddy the waters as much as possible in order to have a chance. Because they have to lie, yes. They have to lie because they know that they're positions are unpopular, and the only reason that they've been able to pass these laws in states is because of things like gerrymandering, voter suppression, the electoral college at the federal level, all of these things. Like, abortion bans are not popular, and so they're just scrambling.
Or the Supreme Court, right? I mean, like this notion. What's incredible that I've observed is that, I mean, they even try to claim credibility on this issue is insane, because their line before this was, oh, we'll leave it to the states. We'll make it the states' rights issue. And as soon as Dobbs was handed down, like a few months later, Lindsey Graham comes out with a bill that would be an abortion ban, capping it, I think, it was at 16 weeks or something to that
15,
effect.
yeah.
15 weeks, which the Republicans were basically like, hey, shut the hell up, Lindsey. You're being too truthful about our intentions to federalize this abortion ban. Be quiet. The entire movement relies on lying until they get in power, and then they exercise their power, and then they move the goalposts to something more restrictive. Like, the Comstock Act, in theory, could be used to restrict, say, birth control or other contraceptive measures, which, there was a vote, I think, a few months ago, where a ton of Republicans voted against codifying the protections for contraception. Like, these laws could expand outside of abortion access.
They absolutely could, and you're right to mention the Supreme Court, because if laws can't pass a divided Congress, they have the stacked conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court to do what they want. And I'm glad that you brought up the bill on contraception. Yes, there was a vote. There have been multiple votes. One most recently, I think just one lawmaker objected, and that blocked the bill. But in the wake of the Dobbs decision in 2022, it was nearly 200 lawmakers, Republicans, who voted against codifying the right to contraception. And they'll say things like, this is hysterical. No one's going after birth control. We don't need this. And then they'll also say, as an aside, like, oh, this bill to codify birth contraception, some people believe would codify things like emergency contraception, which is the morning after pill. And some anti-abortion advocates believe that is an abortion, even though that's completely false. So they're lying through their teeth. And then also, yes, the Comstock Act technically, the provisions about contraception were stripped out of Comstock in the early 70s. But it's, again, if you're going to define emergency contraception as abortion, you could potentially argue to a friendly court that emergency contraception could be banned from being sent in the mail. Like, morning after pills, even IUDs are used as emergency contraception. So there's definitely a threat, and they're absolutely gaslighting people, including Donald Trump himself, who said in an interview earlier this week, I believe it was with CBS, that he did not want to enforce the Comstock Act. It's all over Project 2025, although they will use the U.S. Code citation number, which is 1461, USC 1461. They don't write Comstock. And that was also how Justice Samuel Alito referred to it in the arguments about the abortion pill in March. He did not say, what is your argument regarding the Comstock Act? He said USC 1461, because they want to signal to people who know what they're talking about, but they don't want the broader American public to understand what's happening, which, again, is why I'm so thrilled that Kenan Thompson mentioned the Comstock Act last night, and I wrote about it for Jezebel, saying, this it has the potential to be a moment like Taraji P. Henson bringing up Project 2025 at the BET Awards.
Right. Well, I mean, honestly, sometimes I'm like not in favor of those comedic bits at the conventions, but Kenan did a great job, and that part was really funny as well, bringing up the Comstock Act. It's just crazy to me, because the entirety, when you put it in those terms and you talk about how next on their list are things like the morning after pill or potentially IUDs, you see how this is really about controlling women more than anything. Because are they going to ban condoms? Are they going to ban other forms of male contraception, or say vasectomies, where you also, we'll get to your piece in a second, but they want to ban methods of women exercising agency over, and people who can get pregnant, agency over a pregnancy that maybe, say, the man or the person with the penis is unable to see, right? Like something that's internal to you, or a pill that you take and you get at the pharmacy the next day. It's because it's out of the sight of the man in the patriarchy that is so threatening to these theocrats. And when you put it in those terms, people are like, I don't want to live in the Handmaid's Tale, right?
No.
So
Or you don't want to live back in 1864, like the Arizona ban, or 1873, like the Comstock Act, or the 1950s, which is where it seems like J.D. Vance wants everyone to live, with, family members staying home and taking care of kids, even though that's not what his own wife did. But the way he talks about, childless women who don't contribute things to society, it's a truly, yes, patriarchal, retrograde view. And I do think that's probably what Vice President Harris is referring to in her larger "we're not going back" message. It's just you could pick so many times in the past where Republicans want to send women and people who could get pregnant.
Right, exactly. And I didn't want to gloss over Florida, because that's right. Another state where the state Supreme Court just handed down a decision where they are being nitpicky over the language, I believe. But Florida is my understanding. It's my understanding that you need a 60% threshold to codify abortion access. Also, marijuana is on the ballot in Florida. Those are two favorable things for Democrats, by the way. But that threshold is not the case in Arizona and Montana, right, Susan?
That's absolutely correct. And
okay.
That threshold has been the status quo for a while. If you will recall, Ohio last year tried to raise its threshold from 50 to 60 in advance of the abortion ballot measure going to voters. Just, evidence of everything we've been talking about, trying to block it at every turn. But yeah, 60% is a high bar to clear. The amendment has been polling really well because, again, we know abortion access is popular. But I think that Florida, even if it were to pass, and that is an if, there's concern over the state Supreme Court there, which is stacked with appointees of Ron DeSantis, what they're going to do in regard to any anti-abortion lawsuits, maybe after the fact, challenging language in the state constitution. And this is, let me explain what's happening here, because it's to anyone paying attention, they're like, oh, if people vote and they say, we as Floridians want to protect the right to abortion in our state constitution, that should be the end of the story, right? It's not, unfortunately. Earlier this year, when the Florida State Supreme Court said that this measure could go to voters, it also ruled on a separate lawsuit over whether a 6-week ban could take effect. And in that, they issued these opinions on the same day. Okay. In that ruling over the 6-week ban, it overturned its own precedent, which had held a right to it overhauled its own precedent that a right to privacy encompassed abortion access. And multiple justices on the Supreme Court suggested that they believed that there was a right to life for fertilized eggs, that they believed that there was a right to life to any, like, what they would call potential life. So there are activists in Florida. There's a group called Liberty Council, and that the head of that group already told Bloomberg News back in April that if the amendment passes, he wants to go right back to the Supreme Court and say, okay, sure, that amendment passed, but we think that there's a right to life in the Constitution in a separate clause. So it could get overturned by the Florida Supreme Court.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, didn't they attempt to do that with the minimum wage as well?
Okay. So they definitely, there was something sort of similar happened in 2018 with disenfranchisement for formerly incarcerated people, that passed. And then the state legislature overturned it or didn't let it take effect. But I don't know that it necessarily went to the state
Democracy in action. They literally do ballot initiatives and then have their representatives overturn it. I mean, that's just, it's unconscionable. Okay, absolutely. Lastly, I did want to highlight some of your great reporting before I let you go, because you have a piece in The Guardian and then also a piece of Jezebel, talking about one, how the Jezebel piece is about how there's this mobile health clinic at the DNC in Chicago, and Planned Parenthood of Planned Parenthood Great Rivers. It's the St. Louis, Missouri clinic that had been banned after Dobbs, and I guess they're taking it on the road. What did you observe there at the DNC with Jezebel about that particular clinic?
Right. So this is a mobile clinic that was parked maybe 10 minutes away from the venue, and they were offering limited appointments for free vasectomies and medication abortions, which is a lovely way to bring healthcare to people and also make it accessible, because vasectomies don't have to be covered by insurance, which is kind of wild. People think birth control, as we just discussed earlier, it's only birth control for women that people seem to care about.
Yeah.
So those appointments got snatched up really quickly. And then the clinic from Planned Parenthood Great Rivers also shows that even in a state like Illinois, where abortion access is protected, there are people who still can't afford the procedure because they either don't have insurance or it's too difficult for them to get off work. And sort of having an announcement ahead of time saying, hey, this mobile clinic is going to be here for 2 days. They were operating, they weren't operating. Abortion is not surgery, and they were doing pills. They were offering appointments on Monday and Tuesday, and they announced it a couple days in advance saying we have these appointments. And so for some people, that's what's accessible to them. They can just like book the appointment and know where to go, and it's like it's done. Right. So I will say that was also on site in the parking lot of an art gallery, and a pro-choice messaging was there from other groups. But then outside there were anti-abortion protesters, and they had chalked the sidewalk, and there were some people who had come in and tried to film patients coming in and out of the clinic. And then, anti-abortion groups were saying like, oh, Planned Parenthood is providing abortions at the DNC. It's like, they're not doing it at the convention center. This is an up to code medical RV. I've donated blood on buses that look like this.
Yeah.
And there was a right-wing freak out. Marjorie Taylor Greene got all upset on Twitter, but it's just people getting healthcare. Yeah. And people need help getting that healthcare.
I mean, we're in New York City. Like, we saw these mobile COVID testing vans, right? Where we were able to get a COVID test to see if we were positive at a truck outside. This is exactly what that is, but they only care now because they'll spin up some conspiracy theory that they're giving out free abortions in between, like, Pete Buttigieg and Tim Walz's speech on the stage or something like that. It's just ridiculous. Right. But, Susan, I really appreciate your time today. You can read her work over at Jezebel. We'll link to your latest piece on this very topic that we talked about there in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.